How's it going, everybody? Brandon here at Riverblade Knife and Fly Shop. Today, talking a little bit about fly rod selection. So every now and then I'll get a customer come in here and they'll say to me, hey man, I need a fly rod that I can go catch some trout and maybe some panfish, some brim out here on the local pond or lake. What do you recommend? So when you're picking a fly rod, there's a couple things to keep in mind. But I'll be honest with you, the fish that you're catching or the size of the fish that you're after is really not the top consideration. What it really boils down to is how big of a fly do you have to throw and how far do you have to throw it. Now obviously that's going to loosely then translate into the fish you're after, because your fly selection may be specific to the fish that you're after, and then maybe the areas that you're fishing may dictate how long of a cast you're having to make. But what you're really trying to say is okay, based off what I think I'm going to be fishing for, how long am I going to have to make my casts, how big of a fly am I going to have to throw, what kind of rod and line setup is going to take to do that. So if we take a look at, for instance, some flies, any fish that you're after is still going to have a wide range of fly size that you can throw at it. So let's say if I'm going trout fishing, well, I mean, in some places you might be trout fishing with this, which is tiny obviously, itty bitty size 20 zebra midges there. But in other places you might be trout fishing with that, a large streamer of some kind, or something that's got some heavy weight to it, or maybe you're throwing a nymph rig of some big stone flies and you've got to add some split shot over here and then some indicators and all this kind of stuff. So now what you're saying is I got to throw a lot of stuff, a lot of weight. So the fly line is going to be dictating how heavy of a fly it can throw and probably how far it can throw it. And there's two things going on with that. One, you got the weight of the line itself, whether it's 2 weight, 5 weight, 8 weight, 10 weight, or whatever. And then you have the taper of the line. If you have a look at this, this is what we call magnum tapered fly line. So it's got a real aggressive front end taper going on here, which means it can throw a pretty heavy fly. And being in an 8 weight, you can throw it a pretty long distance. So if you got to throw some big stuff, an 8 weight magnum taper is going to really make it happen. And obviously 8 weight line, you're going to be paired up with an 8 weight rod to throw a lot of heavy things, a lot of long distances. So, your most common rod setup for trout fishing, obviously in this country, is a 9-foot 5 weight. A 5 weight's right in the middle of the road in size. What a 5 weight allows you to do is throw just about any fly that you would realistically want to trout fish with, and about any fly that you'd want to brim fish with. And then the 9-foot length is another thing we need to discuss. Length of the rod really comes down to this too. So the longer a fly rod is, the easier it is for you to cast it, especially distances. It's a lot longer swing arc, it's a lot more forgiving. The shorter the fly rod is, the better your timing has to be and the better a fly caster you have to be in order to get distance out of it. So if you're trying to get some line out a long way, a longer rod is going to do it a lot easier for you than a short rod. Now I get a lot of people say, hey, I fish in some pretty tight canopied trout streams, right? So I fish in some small places, I need a really short fly rod to do it. Well, that's not necessarily the case either. So it'll come down to the style of fishing that you do. But me personally, if I'm going into really tight spaces, I still take a really long fly rod. And instead of worrying about all of my back casts, I just use the reach of the rod to reach out there and take maybe 3 or 4 or 5 feet of fly line out the end of it and drop it on top of where I'm trying to fish. It's a lot easier for me to get a drift that way, a lot easier for me to manage my line that way with the reach of the rod. If I've got a really short fly rod in my hand, yeah, I might be able to tuck into the bushes. I might be able to come over here and tuck into the bushes and make a cast. But with the lack of reach, it's going to be very hard for me to manage my line and achieve a natural drift once my flies hit the water. So in all honesty, when it comes to trout fishing in a river, a really short fly rod to me is kind of a hindrance, because you don't have the ability to manage your line over the cast nearly as well as you do with a really long rod. So in tight spaces, I still take a really long rod I just don't make any casts. I only have a couple of feet of line out the end of my rod, and I just use the rod length to achieve my drifts. So now let's talk about this bass fishing deal for a minute. If you're going to go bass fishing with a fly rod, you got a couple of things going on too. You might be throwing a slightly larger fly, like let's say this mouse pattern or this frog pattern here. But realistically, that's still incredibly light. It doesn't weigh very much. You can really throw that on a 5-weight rod. So yeah, you can bass fish with a 5-weight. You just have to pick your flies accordingly. So if you can get a bass to hit something like this, for instance, it's a really lightweight zonker pattern, easily thrown on a 5-weight, then you can do your bass fishing with a 5-weight. If it's going to take something with some weight and some heft to it, like this big heavy cone-headed streamer right here, that's going to probably require a little bit more line and rod weight to throw. So you're probably going to be up around a 7 or an 8 weight to toss that. Your considerations then on fly rod length and size really boils down to how heavy of a fly do I have to throw, how far do I have to throw it. If you got to throw a big fly a long way, it's going to take something in the heavier weight ranges, 8 weight, 10 weight, 12 weight, 14 weight even, just to get that fly out there, and especially to cast it more than 10 feet. I can throw a pretty heavy fly with a really lightweight line and rod setup, like a 2-weight or a 3-weight. I just can't throw it no more than about 10 feet. So if you got to get a lot longer distance cast out there, you're going to have to go with a much higher weight rod to do it. Obviously, your trade-off on your fishing then becomes, at what point is my rod setup just no longer fun to catch this fish on? I can take an 8-weight rod brim fishing all day long because I can easily throw the flies on it, but it's like catching a brim on a broomstick. That's not very fun. So what you try to do is go with the lightest weight rod setup that you can throw your flies with and still have a lot of fun catching your fish then, because smaller fish feel like bigger fish on lighter weight rod, right? Another consideration on rod weight is this. If you're going trout fishing, let's say, in a place that requires really lightweight leader and tippet setup, so you got to throw a 6X or a 7X at them, so something that's maybe only 2-pound test just to get some bites, a lighter weight rod is going to protect that tippet from breaking a whole lot easier, or better I should say, than a heavier rod like a 5 or a 6-weight. If you're trying to dry fly fish on 7X tippet on a 6-weight rod, that rod's stiffness, you're almost going to break off half the fish on the hook set if you're not careful. Whereas if you go in there with a 2-weight or a 3-weight, you can set the hook with the same kind of effort and force, but because of the limberness and the flex in that 2-weight rod, it will protect that tippet from breaking a whole lot better. So that's another consideration, and I know that's kind of getting into, man, I need a rod for all occasions. Well, if you accumulate multiple rods over numerous years, you do have the ability then to pick the right tool for whatever occasion you're fishing. If you're just trying to get one rod to do everything, you still want to land in the middle of the road with something like a 5-weight or a 6-weight maybe to go trout fishing anywhere practically in the world with that setup. You can brim fish anywhere with it, and it's not too much rod that it's not fun anymore. And you can do some limited bass fishing or fishing for some larger fish as long as you're picking your flies correctly. So try to keep those things in mind next time you're picking a new fly rod. That's it today for Shop Talk.